American Free Press Sample Audio Edition, Issue 38 and 39, September 11th and 18th, 2017. What you are listening to is a sample version of the American Free Press bi-weekly newspaper. Please consider subscribing to get the full version. Feds flop. 2 more Bundy supporters go free, by Mark Anderson. In the ongoing Bundy trials, as they've come to be known, on August 22, a jury was unable to convict 4 defendants who were retried this summer after prosecutors failed to get a conviction the first time around. 2 of those 4, Stephen Stewart and Richard Loveline, have been acquitted of all charges and are free men. Scott Drexler and Eric Parker, however, were acquitted on most but not all counts and are still in federal custody, after languishing in federal prison for around 18 months like the rest of the defendants in this saga. Drexler and Parker have been released to home detention. Although their retrial saw them formally acquitted on some charges, it ended simply with no verdict on other charges. Assault on a federal officer and related firearm charges stemming from their part in a protest against the attempted seizure of Cliven Bundy's cattle during an April 12, 2014 standoff with armed U.S. Bureau of Land Management agents. This means that Drexler and Parker will be retried on the remaining charges, for a third time, and the charges are rather serious. Parker is still facing 4 counts of assaulting a federal officer, threatening a federal officer, using a firearm in a crime of violence while assaulting a federal officer, and the same firearm charged to threaten a federal officer. Drexler's remaining charges are assaulting a federal officer and using a firearm in a crime of violence to assault a federal officer. More good news is that, amid the hard reality of having been imprisoned and denied a speedy trial as the Constitution requires, Cliven Bundy, the patriarch of a family synonymous with protesting often heavy-handed federal land policies, will finally be going to trial in the same federal court. He'll be joined by several other defendants who backed him and his family at that April 2014 protest, where some protesters did carry firearms to exercise their Second Amendment rights in an open carry state, yet no shots were fired in the encounter. Judge Gloria Navarro of the U.S. District Court in Las Vegas set a date of October 10 for jury selection to begin there for the trial of the second set of defendants, which includes Cliven and several others. According to the original court schedule, there were to be 3 trials. Cliven, his sons Ammon and Ryan, internet radio host Pete Santilli, and Ryan Payne have long been slated to be the second trial's defendants, but due to the most recent developments, Drexler and Parker will join them in mid-October. This next trial involving Cliven is the so-called leadership trial, as the government sees it, said legal expert Roger Roots of Montana, who has attended nearly every day of the trial. Cliven, his 2 sons, Santilli and Payne, each face 15 charges, generally including conspiracy, assault and threats against federal officers, firearms counts, and obstruction and extortion. Though it seems unlikely at this juncture, conviction on all charges would ensure life imprisonment for all. An important message from the executive editor: support free speech in book-burning age. What a world we're living in today. Since AFP's founding in August 2001, we have watched as a dark net has slowly been closing around free expression in this country. What are we talking about? We are referring to speeches being cancelled across the country because of threats from radical groups, protesters being funneled into free speech zones, book publishers getting banned by credit card processors, and websites being shut down because someone out there doesn't like what someone else might be saying. Proponents of these forms of censorship claim that violence is the reason for these truly un-American actions. It seems pretty clear, however, that most of the violence is being perpetrated by a small group of radical activists, many of whom are probably on the U.S. government's payroll anyway. To give a little perspective, we're talking about a country that waged war against the British, the most powerful nation at the time, booted them out, and formed a government for its people. It's the same country that saw hundreds of thousands of its own citizens fight and die in a bloody civil war. It is the same country that, for half a century, stared down the Soviet Union, which was armed with thousands of nuclear weapons. But, today, a few scruffy kids take to the internet to complain about hurt feelings, and institutions of higher learning, government agencies, and billion-dollar corporations are falling over each other to clamp down on free speech. So much for the land of the free and the home of the brave. The truth is, in the United States, people should be able to dislike, and, yes, even hate, anyone and anything they want to. Just as it's okay to hate Donald Trump, it's perfectly fine to dislike anyone for any reason, whether they are white, black, Hispanic, tall, short, male, female, rich, poor, gay, straight, liberal or conservative. Moreover, a person should not be in fear of losing his livelihood or his health because he runs a website or publishes books about the kinds of people he hates. In this week's issue, we focus on one of the worst groups out there that has been going after anyone who is not politically left of center. The organization in question has raised tens of millions of dollars and made its founders very wealthy by targeting individuals and groups that speak their minds and exaggerating the impact they have. Of course, we're talking about the Southern Poverty Law Center, the nonprofit foundation that was created by Morris Deese in 1971 to supposedly use the court system to combat racism. The SPLC pays no taxes and has raised over $300 million, yet it spends less than $50,000 to $60,000 a year on actual court cases. As we report in this edition, the SPLC's days may be numbered, as more and more targeted individuals and groups fight back. Unlike groups like the SPLC, here at AFP, we want people to be able to speak and think freely. It's why we keep publishing this newspaper, no matter how many billion-dollar companies, anti-free speech groups, Hollywood actors, and politicians line up to try to shut us up and shout us down. But, as you know, it's hard for a small company like AFP, with limited resources, to keep printing the truth, given the kind of money our enemies have. In the coming weeks, we will be initiating a new fundraising effort to raise the funds we need to stay in business. Keep your eye out for our letter, which will be arriving soon in your mailbox. You can help us compete with the likes of the SPLC and other professional smear groups by continuing to support AFP. By making a donation to support this small, outspoken newspaper, you are in effect supporting free expression for all Americans, something we desperately need in this new American age of book burning and censorship. Capital H, Christopher J. Petherick, Executive Editor. Leftist Law Center sued for defamation. Southern Poverty Law Center being taken to court by Muslim critics of radical Islam. By John Friend. Majid Nawaz, a British Muslim politician and founder of Quilliam, an organization that bills itself as the world's first counter-extremism organization dedicated to combating radical Islamic extremism in the United Kingdom and around the world, is suing the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, for defamation after the subversive, leftist organization labeled the popular Muslim reformer as an anti-Muslim extremist. The SPLC, who made their money suing the KKK, were set up to defend people like me, but now they've become the monster that they claimed they wanted to defeat. Nawaz boldly stated in a video announcing the lawsuit, which he aims to fund in part by soliciting donations from supporters. They have named me, alongside Ayan Hirsi Ali, on a list of anti-Muslim extremists. Nawaz went on to explain, I am suing the SPLC for defamation, and I need your help to win. Ayan Hirsi Ali is a Somali-born Dutch-American feminist activist, author, and politician who founded the AHA Foundation, a leading organization working to end honor violence that shames, hurts, or kills thousands of women and girls. According to the organization's official website, Ali is a critic of the barbaric practice of female genital mutilation, a practice common in some African and Islamic societies, and a fierce opponent of the traditional Islamic attitude toward women and young girls. Her critiques of radical Islam have drawn the ire of the SPLC in the past, and she, along with Nawaz, has been targeted by the radical leftist organization. Nawaz was charged that the SPLC has put him in danger by placing him on its anti-Muslim extremist list and has smeared his reputation and image. In the video, Nawaz also correctly argued that the left has descended into violence, whether that's punching people on the street, throwing explosives and attacking people in protests and riots, or assassination attempts on right-wing politicians by leftist fans of the SPLC. Nawaz was specifically referring to James Hodgkinson, a radical leftist activist who shot Rep. Steve Scala's, R-Law, in June of this year. Hodgkinson liked the SPLC's Facebook page, and was likely influenced by the organization's propaganda. The SPLC has arguably inspired other radical leftist terrorists in the past as well, including Floyd Lee Corkins, a deranged man who broke into the Family Research Council's headquarters in Washington, D.C. in August 2012 with the aim of killing as many people as possible. In early 2013, Corkins was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his crimes, which included a terrorism-related offense. During an FBI interrogation following his apprehension, Corkins admitted to targeting the Family Research Council partly because it was designated as an anti-gay group by the SPLC. In addition to being sued, the SPLC is also facing public backlash after it was revealed that the nonprofit organization, which constantly solicits donations by hyping the alleged threat of hate, bigotry, and white supremacist violence, has roughly $69 million of its total endowment in overseas accounts, including in the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, and the British Virgin Islands. The SPLC has millions of dollars at its disposal, and boasts an endowment of nearly $320 million. According to an explosive report in online news outlet The Washington Free Beacon, the SPLC pays lucrative six-figure salaries to its top directors and key employees while spending little on legal services despite its stated intent of fighting hate and bigotry using litigation, education, and other forms of advocacy. I've never known a U.S.-based nonprofit dealing in human rights or social services to have any foreign bank accounts, Amy Sterling Castle, CEO of Pacific Human Capital, a California-based nonprofit consulting firm, explained to the Washington Free Beacon. My impression based on prior interactions is that they have a small, modestly paid staff, and were regarded by most in the industry as frugal and reliable. I am stunned to learn of transfers of millions to offshore bank accounts. It is a huge red flag and would have been completely unacceptable to any wealthy, responsible, experienced board member who was committed to a charitable mission who I ever worked with. The SPLC has raised millions of dollars in the wake of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, last month, including $1 million from Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple. J.P. Morgan Chase also pledged to donate $500,000 to the SPLC in the aftermath of Charlottesville, and many other top corporations and opinion leaders have pledged money to help the SPLC ostensibly fight hate and discrimination. Shocking statistics about the SPLC from the daring freebeacon.com investigation. Some very disturbing facts were revealed about the SPLC. Richard Cohen, President and Chief Executive Officer of the SPLC, was given $346,218 in base compensation in 2015, its tax forms show. Cohen received $20,000 more in other reportable compensation and non-taxable benefits. Morris Dees, SPLC's chief trial counsel, received a salary of $329,560 with $42,000 in additional reportable compensation and non-taxable benefits. The minimum amount paid to an officer, director, trustee, or key employee in 2015 was $140,000 in base salary, not including other compensation. The group spent $20 million on salaries throughout the year. The SPLC, which claims to boast a staff of 75 lawyers who practice in the area of children's rights, economic justice, immigrant justice, homosexual rights, transgender rights, and criminal justice reform, reported spending only $61,000 on legal services in 2015. Fighting hate, killing free speech. Anti-Defamation League undercutting free expression by indoctrinating mayors, police, by John Friend. The Anti-Defamation League, ADL, an organization openly hostile to the First Amendment that seeks to advance pro-Israel interests and shut down free expression with often baseless charges of anti-Semitism, has partnered with the United States Conference of Mayors in the wake of the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, VA, in an effort to combat hate and extremism. Marxist buzzwords that are applied to patriotic Americans willing to buck the tyrannical system of political correctness plaguing the West. The United States Conference of Mayors is an official, nonpartisan organization representing American cities with populations exceeding 30,000. More than 300 mayors from major American cities across the nation have collaborated with the ADL on the project, and have pledged to implement the 10-point Mayor's Compact to combat hate, extremism, and bigotry, developed almost entirely by the subversive, anti-American organization. Some of the 10 key initiatives outlined in the compact include rejecting extremism, white supremacy, and all forms of bigotry, as well as prioritizing and promoting anti-bias and anti-hate programs, which are also developed by the ADL, in America's public and private schools. Additionally, the compact encourages local residents and community members to report hate incidents, seeks to strengthen hate crime laws, and promotes training for law enforcement officials across the country to respond to and deal with hate. The compact represents an attempt by the ADL to institutionalize its subversive, anti-free speech agenda, a major and long-running goal of the anti-American organization. The Unite the Right rally, which was legally organized by leading members of the alt-right, a burgeoning, loose-knit, right-wing movement that embraces racial identity and populism while rejecting globalism, multiculturalism, and massive non-white immigration to America and the wider Western world, has been used as an excuse to advance a number of blatantly anti-free speech agendas, including the censoring of some alt-right commentators on the Internet. The rally was legally permitted, yet faced enormous obstacles from local political leaders in Charlottesville. The entirely distorted narrative spun by the political and media establishment portrayed the alt-right organizers and supporters as hateful, racist bigots who were determined to violently confront and attack the counter-protesters who showed up to peacefully demonstrate against the rally. The fake news media and establishment political and media pundits hysterically condemned everyone in the alt-right as violent extremists and terrorists, white supremacists, neo-Nazis, and even Ku Klux Klansmen. Meanwhile, Antifa and other leftist extremists who engaged in physical confrontations and violence against the alt-right were portrayed as righteous and honorable protesters simply attempting to exercise their First Amendment rights. Needless to say, the concept of hate will be defined by the ADL and will, of course, encompass any form of criticism or resistance to its subversive, anti-American agenda. What happened in Charlottesville reminds us all that violent hate and racism are very much alive in America in 2017, Tom Cochran, the CEO and executive director of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, said when the compact was announced. For decades, America's mayors have taken a strong position in support of civil rights and in opposition to racism and discrimination of all kinds. At this critical time, mayors are doing so again through this compact in an effort to combat hate, extremism, and bigotry in their cities and in our nation. The ADL has played a key role in politicizing and militarizing law enforcement in the United States for decades, and routinely offers training courses for local, state, and federal law enforcement officials and entities across the country. The ADL openly describes itself as the foremost non-governmental organization in the United States that offers law enforcement training on terrorism, extremism, and hate crimes, and boasts that it has trained well over 100,000 federal, state, local, and military law enforcement officers. Law enforcement officials at all levels of government also regularly travel to Israel to receive training and advice from their Israeli counterparts, particularly in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, which many prominent researchers believe the Zionist state played a central role in carrying out, further militarizing American law enforcement, as is the case in Israel. This often involves U.S. law enforcement working closely with the Israeli military and police, both of which have been accused of carrying out war crimes against Muslims and Christians in the Holy Land. Interestingly, Anita Gray, a regional director for the ADL in Cleveland, Ohio, admitted in a revealing interview with Cleveland Jewish News shortly after the rally that her organization had been working on the ground and behind the scenes leading up to, during, and after the rally in Charlottesville. We remain in close contact with law enforcement, elected officials, community leaders, and others and continue to provide critical research, resources, and community support, Ms. Gray went on to explain. All of our offices have been working around the clock to respond, inform, and take action. The insidious agenda of the ADL could not be clearer in the aftermath of the Unite the Right rally, that is, to stamp out criticism of Israel. Texas blacks back rebel monuments. Many activists realize stone and marble not the worst problems facing blacks. By Dave Gahary. Following the government and mainstream media instigated violence in Charlottesville, last month, various municipalities across this once great nation are taking and considering taking preemptive steps to remove Confederate monuments from public land, so as not to invoke the wrath of the ascendant terrorist groups Black Lives Matter and the more loosely organized Antifa. In the halcyon days of these United States, if mask-wearing thugs arrived in any town or city intent on waging war in that community, they were met with the iron fist of law and order. No more. On August 14, Philip Kingston, who serves on the Dallas City Council, took aim at a Robert E. Lee statue and other monuments in the city. Kingston believes monuments to the Confederacy should not be on public land, as reported in an article by the local CBS fake news outlet. So biased and hateful have the fake news media become that the caption under the photo of the Lee statue reads, "The Confederate War Memorial in Dallas, Texas, is a monument that attempts to glorify the treasonous acts of those who fought to defend slavery on the Confederate side of the American Civil War." Kingston's resolution requires action by September 13, when, if passed, a citizen-based task force will be created to decide the fate of the monuments. Interestingly, the Southern Heritage Destroying Councilman made news in July when the city's chief financial officer sent a memo to Kingston demanding he return $8,160 of his $60,000 salary because he missed too many council meetings. "I was just busy," Kingston said, as reported by the Dallas Morning News. Some Dallas residents are busy as well, but for a different reason. A predominantly black group led by former city councilwoman Sandra Crenshaw is calling for Dallas's Confederate monuments to remain standing, since removing them will not help alleviate media alleged racism. "I'm not intimidated by Robert E. Lee's statue," Miss Crenshaw told the aforementioned newspaper. "It doesn't scare me. We don't want America to think that all African Americans are supportive of this. Some people think that by taking a statue down, that's going to erase racism. Misguided." Naturally, Kingston struck back. "What we don't do is leave up a monument that celebrates the very idea that some of us are not equal to the others," he said. "These monuments distort history. They don't teach history." On cue, Democratic Mayor, former Pizza Hut CEO, and ad agency head Mike Rawlings chimed in by stating that the white supremacists in Charlottesville were pure evil. American Free Press asked 69-year-old black Confederate supporter H.K. Edgerton for his views on the happenings in Dallas and across the country. "I applaud the fact that they're coming together to oppose the removal of statues," he began. "However, I don't like the tone of this message. Instead of saying not intimidated by Robert E. Lee, she should have been very proud of General Robert E. Lee, Probably one of the most admired and respected men of his time and this time, Edgerton commented on the culture destroyers. What we have now is a continuation of what these folks did after the war when they sent these northern school teachers to the Southland of America, he said, trying to divide and separate black folks and white folks. The biggest problem I have is not with black folks, it's with white folk guilt, he said. Most of the Black Lives Matter folks I see are young white folks. I've been all across this country and I'll tell you right now most black folks don't like being used as a weapon of choice to enable this destruction of our heritage and our history by tearing down these monuments. This looks like Reconstruction all over again, he added. I ran into Black Lives Matter and I've run into Antifa in places where I was going to speak. These folks are domestic terrorists. If Black Lives Matter, they ought to be in Houston right now trying to help some black folks. If Black Lives Matter, they ought to be in Chicago trying to help those black folks who are killing each other in record numbers. Dream Act Hypocrisy. Kids of illegals get benefits while needy U.S. students lose vouchers, by Alan B. West. President Donald Trump has announced he will be ending the Obama program called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. The program was established by Barack Obama in June 2012 and allows illegal immigrants who enter the United States as minors to receive renewable, 2-year deferments from deportation as well as work permits. First, we need to understand that the pertinent word is illegal. These are children born in the United States of illegal immigrant parents who had violated and disregarded the sovereign laws of this nation. If we are to continue as a constitutional republic, and not a constitutional monarchy, we must adhere to and preserve our rule of law. DACA is unconstitutional in every way. The Constitution states it clearly in Article I, Section 8, Clause 4, to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. Article I denotes the enumerated powers of the legislative branch, the House and Senate, or Congress, and Article II denotes the enumerated powers of the executive branch. A simple perusal will help the reader realize that we're to be governed by the rule of law, not ruled by edict from an executive. Article II consists of only 4 sections. The final section establishes the grounds for removal of the executive, the president. If we wish to have a purely constitutional discussion about DACA, it's obvious Obama exceeded his enumerated powers and established an unconstitutional policy. Now, the question is, do we want to be ruled by edict based upon the ideological agenda of a ruler? If so, then let's go right ahead and continue on with DACA. But the progressive socialist left then loses any grounds to complain about unconstitutional actions. They can't accomplish their goal of fundamentally transforming America outside the bounds of our rule of law. It's not up to the president, any president, to decide that he or she wants to do something without the legislative branch. In essence, that's taking action without the consent of the governed. The American people elect representatives to be their voice, so any disregard of the legislative branch is a dismissal and disregard of the American people. DACA is nothing more than a feel-good, ideological political tool based on identity politics. If anything, it advances the notion, which the left loves, that there are those above the rule of law. Just look at sanctuary cities, counties, and states. The left's agenda is apparently superior to our rule of law. The hypocrisy of DACA is blatant. Who decides what constitutes being a dreamer? Yes, that sounds so nice, and again, it tugs at hearts, but I seem to recall in April 2009 that the same Obama behind DACA ended the D.C. school voucher program for deserving young, black, minority kids, and not a peep came from the progressive socialist left and the liberal progressive media. The deduction is simple, the left chooses based on their politicized agenda. Funny, DACA was enacted in 2012, a presidential election year. That should tell you everything. Who gets to define what's hate? Christian urban renewal activist says alt-left following an insidious path. By Star Parker. As if recent events don't give us enough to worry about, Now we have a new missive in the Atlantic magazine from former Vice President Joe Biden concerning the incident in Charlottesville. Biden wants to declare America a hate-free zone. He says we should declare no place for these hate groups in America. Hatred of blacks, Jews, immigrants, all who are seen as the other, won't be accepted or tolerated or given safe harbor anywhere in this nation. Biden articulates for us here the vision of the alt-left. America gets transformed from being about limited government, with laws to protect individual freedom, to sponsoring search and destroy missions for eliminating hatred. And, of course, Biden and his left-wing friends will define for us who the haters are. As sickening as the alt-right racist bigots may be, at least we know where they're coming from. They make no claim to the high ground. Their racism is on the table, in the light of day. But the alt-left is far more insidious. Take, for instance, the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC. They are self-appointed mission control for identifying who and where are the haters in America. They publish a hate map on their website, in which 917 hate groups are identified, ripe for elimination in the spirit of Biden's appeal. Included are 101 anti-Muslim hate groups, but somehow not a single anti-Christian hate group is identified. Actually, Christian groups, in their map, turn out to be the haters. SPLC identifies at least 19 Christian organizations as hate groups. Groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom, which provides legal counsel to those whose religious freedom has been abrogated, for example, a Christian baker being sued for refusing to create a cake for a same-sex wedding, or Family Research Council, which publishes research in support of public policy consistent with traditional Christian values, or D. James Kennedy Ministries, which, through its church and media, disseminates the Christian gospel and sermons of its founder, Dr. D. James Kennedy. Peacefully preaching Christian gospel is, in the eyes of the SPLC, an act of hate because part of this gospel chastises homosexual behavior as sinful. Unfortunately, in today's tortured culture, sources deemed by some authority like CNN or GuideStar, which provides data on evaluating nonprofit organizations, reference the SPLC hate map as a guide to hate in the country. Two major corporations, J.P. Morgan and Apple, announced six-figure contributions to the SPLC after the events in Charlottesville. In a memo to employees, J.P. Morgan's head of corporate responsibility noted that their contribution to SPLC is to further their work in tracking, exposing, and fighting hate groups and other extremist organizations across the country. In 2012, a young man entered the office of the Family Research Council in Washington, D.C., and shot the building manager. He, fortunately, was caught and subsequently sentenced to 25 years in prison. He was a volunteer at a pro-gay organization and told the FBI that he used the SPLC hate map to find FRC and that his plan was to kill as many as he could. D. James Kennedy Ministries recently filed a lawsuit against the SPLC for defamation. In recent media appearances discussing Charlottesville, I noted the equivalency I see between the LGBT rainbow flag and the Confederate flag. Both stand, as I explained, for particular dogma and are statements of exclusion to those who don't fit their worldview. Those who don't agree with me are welcome to say so, but, instead, the so-called advocates of tolerance shut down my office in Washington, D.C., with an avalanche of calls and threats. We can't legislate what people feel, but we can and must recapture the American vision of freedom, where law protects individual life, liberty and property, so our large and diverse population can live together peacefully and productively. Congress, Trump declaring war on WikiLeaks. By Rep. Ron Paul, the Senate Intelligence Committee recently passed its Intelligence Authorization Act for 2018 that contains a chilling attack on the First Amendment. Section 623 of the Act expresses the sense of Congress that WikiLeaks resembles a non-state hostile intelligence service often abetted by state actors and should be treated as such. This language is designed to delegitimize WikiLeaks, encourage the federal government to spy on individuals working with WikiLeaks, and block access to WikiLeaks' website. This provision could even justify sending U.S. forces abroad to arrest WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange or other WikiLeaks personnel. WikiLeaks critics claim that the organization's leaks harm U.S. national security. However, these critics are unable to provide a single specific example of WikiLeaks' actions harming the American people. WikiLeaks does harm the reputations of government agencies and politicians, however. For example, earlier this year WikiLeaks released information on the CIA's hacking program. The leaks did not reveal any details on operations against foreign targets, but they did let the American people know how easy it is for the government to hack into their electronic devices. For the last year, most of the news surrounding WikiLeaks has centered on its leak of emails showing how prominent Democrats work to undermine Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. In order to deflect attention from these revelations, Democrats, aided by their allies in the media and even some Republicans, promulgated a conspiracy theory blaming the leaks on Russian hackers working to defeat Hillary Clinton. Even though there is no evidence the Russians were behind the leaks, many in both parties are still peddling the Putin did it narrative. This aids an effort by the deep state and its allies in Congress and the media to delegitimize last year's election, advance a new Cold War with Russia, and criminalize WikiLeaks. If the government is successful in shutting down WikiLeaks by labeling it a hostile intelligence service, it will use this tactic to silence other organizations and websites as well. The goal will be to create a climate of fear to ensure no one dares publish the revelations of the future Edward Snowden or Chelsea Manning. Some have suggested that criticizing police brutality, the surveillance state, the Federal Reserve, or even federal spending aids hostile foreign powers by weakening the people's trust in government. This line of reasoning could be used to silence, in the name of national security, websites critical of the welfare warfare state. By labeling WikiLeaks a hostile intelligence service and thus legitimizing government action against the organization, the Senate Intelligence Authorization Act threatens the ability of whistleblowers to inform the public about government misdeeds. It also sets a precedent that could be used to limit other types of free speech. Trump should make it clear he will veto any bill giving government new powers to silence organizations like WikiLeaks. If Trump supports the war on WikiLeaks, after candidate Trump proclaimed his love for WikiLeaks, it will be further proof that he has outsourced his presidency to the deep state.